The Tokyo sky should have been quiet that morning. Still, gray, and unsuspecting. Japanese anti-aircraft gunners were only just settling into their posts when they heard it. A deep, unfamiliar growl rolling across the horizon. It wasn't the slow, droning hum of B-29 bombers they were used to. This sound was sharper, faster, like a blade slicing through the air at impossible speed. Then, out of the clouds they appeared. Sleek, silver shapes diving in at 444 miles per hour. Sunlight flashing across their wings. The Japanese pilots on dawn patrol blinked in disbelief. At first they thought their eyes were tricking them. American fighters? Over Tokyo. That far inland? Impossible. The Americans didn't have any fighters with the range to reach the Japanese capital. They all knew that. But everything they believed was shattered in the next heartbeat. A young Japanese pilot named Hiroshi watched from his cockpit as one of the silver aircraft streaked past him. So close he felt the shockwave rattle his plane. He gasped when he saw the unmistakable long nose profile and bubble canopy. It was a Mustang. A P-51 Mustang. But not the version the Japanese intelligence reports described. These Mustangs had something strange attached beneath their wings. Drop tanks, massive metal cylinders that gave them a range no one thought possible. Hiroshi reached for his radio, voice trembling as he shouted to his squadron. These aircraft, they should not be here. But before he could finish, a Mustang rolled in behind him. Machine guns sparking to life. The air around his plane erupted in flashes of fire. Down below, Tokyo residents stopped in the streets, shielding their eyes against the morning glare. Many thought at first that it must be B-29s again. More bombings, more terror from the sky. But the speed, the noise, the maneuvering. This was something entirely different. Something terrifying. And then, high above everything, one Mustang pilot, young American airman Jack Turner, gritted his teeth and yanked the stick hard to the right, diving straight into the chaos. Never did he imagine he'd be flying over the Japanese capital itself, but here he was, adrenaline slamming through his chest, hands shaking around the throttle. No turning back. No second chances. His squadron leader's voice crackled through the radio moments before all this began. Gentlemen, today, history changes. Now Jack understood why. But the Japanese air forces were scrambling fast. Sirens wailed across the city. Fighters launched from nearby airfields. Anti-aircraft guns spat fire into the sky. Jack pulled up sharply as black flak clouds exploded around him. The shockwaves rocking the Mustang. He steadied his breathing. He didn't come this far to lose it now. From his altitude, he saw the entire city stretching beneath him. Tokyo, the heart of the empire, suddenly vulnerable in a way Japan never expected. The Mustangs weren't just attacking. They were escorting something. Something large and approaching from the west. Jack glanced over his shoulder, and his heart jumped. B-29s. Dozens of them. The Japanese defenses realized it too late. Hiroshi, still shaken from his near miss, dove straight toward the formation, determined to defend his homeland. But as he approached, 3 Mustangs dropped from above like hawks. Their drop tanks detached and tumbled through the air before exploding against the streets below. The fighters accelerated. Fast, furious, unstoppable. Hiroshi swallowed hard. These weren't the same American fighters he'd battled months earlier. They were faster, sharper, coordinated like wolves in a hunt. And Hiroshi, one of Japan's most skilled pilots, suddenly felt like prey. Jack tightened his grip as he saw Hiroshi aligning for a head-on attack. For a moment, the 2 young pilots locked eyes across the sky. 2 men from opposite worlds, both terrified, both determined. They fired at the same time. A brilliant crossfire lit the heavens. But we won't see who survives. Not yet. Because long before this moment, long before the Mustangs pierced the Tokyo sky, a chain of decisions and sacrifices set this mission into motion. And the truth behind how these 444 miles per hour fighters reached the Japanese capital is far more unbelievable than what happened today. Before we get deeper into the story, take a moment to subscribe, like, and share so you don't miss the next chapters. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers around the world. What would you have done in Hiroshi's place? Now, Let's go back to where it all began. 2 years before the Mustangs ever appeared over Tokyo, Jack Turner stood on a dusty airstrip in Idaho, staring at a battered training plane with disappointment. He was 19, restless, and convinced that the war was moving faster than he was. Every newspaper headline screamed of battles in distant places. Midway, Guadalcanal, Tarawa. But Jack was stuck stateside, spinning in endless circles of training exercises. "You'll get your chance," his instructor told him one chilly morning. "But only if you stop flying like your pants are on fire." Jack laughed, but his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't impatient because he craved glory. He was impatient because his brother, David, had been killed in Europe the previous year when his bomber went down over Germany. Losing David burned something into Jack, a mixture of grief, fear, and determination that wouldn't let him rest. When he finally qualified for fighter training, Jack thought he'd be sent to Europe to face the Luftwaffe. Instead, his orders redirected him to a new project, one so secret he wasn't even told its name. All he knew was that he had to report to a remote base in California. On his first day there, Jack was led past hangars filled with strange equipment and unfamiliar test aircraft. Unlike the dusty fields in Idaho, this place hummed with energy and tension. Technicians barely looked up from their work. Pilots walked with nervous excitement. It felt like stepping into the eye of a storm. He was taken to a briefing room where a tall man with sharp spectacles introduced himself as Colonel Hayes. "I know you expected something different," the colonel said, sliding a folder across the table toward him. "But the war in the Pacific is changing, and we need pilots who can change with it." Jack opened the folder and froze. Inside was a blueprint of a fighter aircraft unlike anything he'd flown. Sleek lines, long nose, deep belly scoop, the P-51 Mustang. He'd heard rumors about it. Fast as lightning, handles like a dream, but short-legged, unable to fly long distances. At least that was the old version. "These," Hayes said, tapping the blueprint, "are being fitted with new Merlin engines. And we're developing external tanks that could triple their range." Jack looked up sharply. Triple. That would put. Yes, the colonel cut in. It would put Tokyo in reach. Jack closed the folder slowly as the weight of the words settled on him. He wasn't just joining a unit. He was stepping into a gamble, one that could change the entire Pacific War. Training began immediately. The first time Jack sat inside a Mustang, his pulse spiked. The cockpit felt snug and dangerous, like sitting on a rocket with wings. When the engine started, the whole plane seemed to inhale. Jack felt the vibrations through his bones. But with greater speed came greater demands. Mustang training was brutal. Pilots blacked out from G-forces during tight turns. Engines overheated. Tires burst on landing. More than once, Jack walked away from his plane drenched in sweat, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. But every setback carved him sharper. Meanwhile, Japanese forces tightened their defenses across the Pacific, confident no American fighter could escort bombers as far as the Japanese homeland. They didn't know about the quiet experiments happening in California. They didn't know about the tanks, the modified fuel lines, the redesigned wings. And they certainly didn't know about the young men being molded into something far more dangerous than a typical fighter squadron. One evening, after a particularly grueling flight that left Jack's arms trembling, Colonel Hayes met him on the tarmac. "You want to know why you're here?" he asked. Jack nodded weakly. Hayes pointed toward the setting sun. "Because somewhere out there, our boys are dying in B-29s before they even reach their targets. Tokyo is heavily defended now. We need fighters that can go the whole distance. Go in, protect the bombers, and fight their way back out." Jack swallowed. "And you think we can do it?" Hayes gave a thin smile. "I don't think. I know. But only with pilots who understand the responsibility. The kind of pilots who don't break when the sky turns against them." Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everything in him burned with the memory of David, his brother who never made it home. If Jack could help keep even one bomber crew alive, then he'd fly into any storm. Weeks turned into months. The Mustangs grew stronger. Pilots grew sharper. And whispers began circulating through the base. Whispers about a mission so bold, so dangerous, even senior officers argued about its chances of success. But the brass had already made their decision. The operation would go forward. Then one evening, before the official briefing could even begin, an unexpected visitor stepped into the hangar. Someone whose identity would change everything Jack thought he knew about the mission. And nothing would be the same after that. The hangar fell silent the moment the stranger walked in. Jack, still wiping grease from his hands after inspecting his Mustang, turned to see a man in a crisp dark suit step into the light. He didn't look like a military officer. He looked like someone who belonged in a Washington office, not on a dusty California airfield. Colonel Hayes straightened his posture. "Gentlemen," he announced to the pilots and mechanics, "this is Mr. Alden Shaw." A quiet murmur rippled through the hangar. Everyone had heard the name. Shaw wasn't a pilot. He wasn't a soldier. He was a strategist for the Army Air Forces, one of the key minds behind the long-range bombing strategy in the Pacific. If he was here, it meant something big was coming. Shaw studied the men before him, hands clasped behind his back. "You've all been training hard," he said, his voice calm but carrying authority. "But now we're moving into a new phase. One that depends not just on your flying skills, but on your discipline, precision, and willingness to adapt." Jack exchanged glances with the other pilots. Adapt. After everything they had been through already. Shaw walked toward Jack's Mustang, circling it like a man evaluating a prized racehorse. "The P-51 is a remarkable aircraft," he said softly. "Fast, agile, deadly. But its greatest weakness has always been range. That ends now." He signaled to a mechanic, who rolled a large crate into view. With a crowbar, the mechanic pried it open. Inside were two enormous cylindrical tanks, sleek metal, polished, and marked with fuel capacity that made Jack blink. "These are long-range drop tanks," Shaw said. "They extend your flight time far beyond what enemy intelligence believes possible." One of the seasoned pilots, Lieutenant Ross, raised a skeptical brow. "Sir, those tanks look heavy. Won't they slow us down?" Shaw smiled slightly. "Only until you release them. After that, your Mustangs will be faster than anything the Japanese have in the air." Jack stepped forward. "Sir," he asked, choosing his words carefully, "why are we the ones being given this? What exactly are we preparing for?" Shaw's eyes locked onto his. In that moment, the hum of engines, the clatter of tools, the chatter of mechanics, all of it faded into a heavy stillness. "You," Shaw said, "are being prepared to escort B-29s all the way to Tokyo." Jack felt his breath catch. Even the most optimistic estimates said no American fighter could reach that far. It wasn't just dangerous. It was unthinkable. Shaw continued, walking among the aircraft. "Japanese defenses are tightening. Their fighters are becoming more aggressive. Their anti-aircraft guns more accurate. Our bombers are suffering heavy losses. If we don't push deeper, if we don't hit their heart, we risk prolonging this war for years." Jack's fists clenched at his sides. He pictured his brother David, lost somewhere over Europe, never given a chance to fight with proper protection. Shaw's words carved into him. "We will not repeat that mistake," Shaw said firmly. "Not in the Pacific. Not again." Training intensified after that. Day after day, Jack and the others flew with the drop tanks attached, learning how the extra weight changed takeoff, climbing, turning, and landing. The Mustangs handled differently. Slower to respond at first, heavier on the wings, harder to maneuver. But once the tanks dropped, the aircraft surged forward like a predator unchained. More than once, Jack found himself staring at the tanks lying on the desert floor after release testing. They represented more than fuel. They represented possibility, reach, a way to strike where the enemy thought they were untouchable. But the mission wasn't just about reaching Tokyo. One night, Colonel Hayes gathered the pilots in a dimly lit briefing room. A map of the Pacific was pinned across the wall, dotted with red markers representing Japanese defenses. "Tokyo won't be our only problem," Hayes began. "The Japanese aren't blind. They're testing new fighters. Faster ones. More maneuverable ones." A chill ran through the room. Jack leaned forward. "Sir, you mean we could be facing aircraft we've never seen before?" Hayes nodded grimly. "You won't just be breaking distance records. You'll be flying into a sky where the enemy is desperate and dangerous." The tension in the room thickened. Every pilot understood what that meant. This mission wasn't just high risk, it was unprecedented. And that night, as Jack walked back to the barracks under the cool California air, he looked up at the stars and wondered if he would ever see them from home again. Before he slept, he made a silent promise. If he had to go all the way to Tokyo to protect American crews, he would. No hesitation. But he had no idea that one of the men training beside him would make a choice, one that would threaten the entire mission. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And tell us in the comments what you would have done if you were asked to fly a mission this dangerous. The man who would threaten everything wasn't obvious at first. He trained hard, flew well, and kept mostly to himself. His name was Tom Callahan, a broad-shouldered pilot with sharp eyes and a sharper temper. Jack didn't know much about him, except that he'd transferred from another fighter group under unclear circumstances. Rumors swirled, disciplinary issues, disagreements with commanding officers, even accusations that he'd ignored orders in combat. No one knew the full truth. But Jack noticed something unsettling. Callahan didn't believe in the mission. At first, it was small comments muttered under his breath. "This is suicide. We're not built for this. Tokyo. They're gonna swat us out of the sky." Jack ignored him at first. Everyone had nerves. But Callahan's doubts grew louder as training intensified. He skipped briefings, argued with Hayes, complained openly about the drop tanks, calling them death barrels. One afternoon, Jack found him alone in the hangar, staring at the massive tanks as if they offended him personally. "You hate those things," Jack said lightly, trying to break the tension. Callahan didn't smile. "You should too." Jack shrugged. "They'll get us to Tokyo. That's the point." "Yeah," Callahan snapped. "And straight into a sky packed with fighters we can't outrun until we drop them. You really think Command cares about us? They care about the bombers. We're just bait." Jack stiffened. "That's not true." Callahan leaned in, eyes dark. "Kid, I've been shot at. Burned. I've watched friends go down in flames. I know when a mission is stacked against us. And this one. It's a coffin with wings." Jack walked away, unsettled. Callahan wasn't just scared. He was dangerous. And if he cracked in the air, he could put everyone at risk. But Jack didn't have long to dwell on it. Training reached a peak. They practiced escort formations, long-range navigation, evasive maneuvers, high-altitude climbs. Engineers added new radio systems. Mechanics reinforced the wings. Every improvement felt like a step closer to something massive, something the world wasn't ready for. Then, one morning before dawn, Colonel Hayes summoned the entire squadron to the briefing room. The door closed behind them, locking out the noise of engines warming on the tarmac. Hayes stood in front of a large covered board. When he pulled the sheet away, the pilots stared in stunned silence. It was Tokyo. Every landmark, every approach route, every anti-aircraft position the intelligence teams could confirm. Hayes took a breath. "Gentlemen, this is it." A long pause filled the room. "In 48 hours, you will escort B-29s on the deepest strike of the war. You will launch from Iwo Jima, recently secured, refuel, attach your long-range tanks, and head straight for the Japanese capital." Gasps rippled through the room. This wasn't training anymore. This wasn't theory. It was happening. Jack felt his pulse spike as Hayes pointed to the flight path. It was long, dangerous, and left almost no room for error. They would be exposed for hours, flying over enemy waters and coastlines. Hayes continued. "The Japanese believe no American fighter can reach Tokyo. They've structured their defenses around that assumption. Use that advantage. Hit them fast. Hit them before they know what's happening." The room remained silent, heavy with fear and anticipation. Then the colonel's tone hardened. "But understand this. Once you drop your tanks, you'll be the fastest fighters in the sky. But until that moment, you'll be heavy, slow, vulnerable. His eyes swept across the pilots. If any of you break formation before the tanks drop, you compromise not just the squadron, but the entire mission. Callahan shifted in his seat. Hayes noticed. "Is there a problem, Lieutenant Callahan?" The colonel asked. Callahan's jaw tightened. "Just wondering, sir. What happens if we get jumped before we're ready? Do we stay in formation and get torn apart?" Hayes answered without hesitation. "You stay in formation until the moment I give the order. If you leave early, you put the bombers at risk. And that is unacceptable." Callahan didn't argue further, but Jack could tell the fight inside him wasn't settled. After the briefing, the pilots filed out, whispering anxiously. Jack paused at the doorway, looking back at the map. Tokyo stared back at him like a giant waiting to be challenged. That night, the squadron slept lightly, if they slept at all. Engines roared in the distance as mechanics performed last-minute checks. The air on base felt electric, as if charged with history being written. But Jack woke suddenly around 3 a.m. A strange noise echoed outside. Metal clattering. Footsteps. Someone moving where they shouldn't be. He threw on his boots and stepped into the night, heart pounding. And what he saw near the Mustangs made his blood run cold. Before we continue, remember, if this story is gripping you so far, make sure to subscribe, like, and share so you never miss an update. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if someone in your squadron didn't believe in the mission? Jack froze in the shadows, breath held tight in his chest. The moonlight cutting across the tarmac revealed a figure moving between the Mustangs. Fast, nervous, checking over his shoulder every few seconds. Jack didn't need to get any closer to know who it was. Callahan. But he wasn't just walking around. He was tampering with something. Jack ducked behind an engine crate and watched as Callahan crouched beside one of the long-range drop tanks, tools glinting faintly in his hands. He loosened a valve, then reached for another. The realization hit Jack like a punch. He wasn't checking the equipment. He was sabotaging it. Jack stepped forward before he stopped himself. If Callahan panicked, he might cause even more damage. Jack moved quietly, silently, closing the distance one careful step at a time. But Callahan suddenly stiffened, sensing movement. He straightened, turned, and saw Jack emerging from the shadows. The two men locked eyes. For a few seconds, neither said a word. The cool night air pressed between them. "What are you doing?" Jack finally asked. Callahan didn't flinch. "Trying to save our lives." "By destroying our fuel?" Jack hissed. "You're going to get us killed." Callahan stood, tools still in hand. "Killed? Jack, this mission already has us dead. You think we're coming back from Tokyo? You think those bombers survive without us? You think we survive escorting them against fighters we've never even seen before?" Jack stepped closer. "Everyone here is afraid. But we're still going." Callahan's expression hardened. "Some people follow bad orders. I don't." Jack glanced at the half-loosened valves, imagining what would have happened if the squadron had taken off like this. They would have run out of fuel before reaching Tokyo, crashing into the sea or being picked off along the coast. "You were going to doom the whole mission," Jack said quietly. "Not save us." Callahan threw his tools on the ground. "You don't understand. Hayes doesn't understand. They've convinced all of you that you're invincible because you're flying faster planes. But speed doesn't win wars. Survival does." Jack shook his head slowly. Survival at the cost of everyone else? That's not courage. That's betrayal. The word hung between them like smoke. Callahan's face darkened. "You think I'm a traitor? Fine. Go ahead. Tell Hayes. Tell Shaw. Tell the whole squadron I'm the monster. But remember this, when you're thousands of miles out and you run out of fuel, or get jumped by fighters you can't outmaneuver, you'll wish you had walked away tonight." Jack tried to keep his voice steady. "Maybe. But I'd rather take that chance than quit before we even try." Callahan stared at him for a long, tense moment. Then he stepped back, hands raised. "Do what you want," he said. "But I won't die for a mission that was doomed from the start." He turned and walked into the darkness, leaving Jack alone among the silent Mustangs. Jack didn't chase him. He knelt beside the damaged tank, checking the valves and tightening what Callahan had loosened. His hand shook, not from fear but from the weight of what almost happened. If Callahan had succeeded, the mission might have collapsed before it began. By sunrise, the entire base was buzzing. Mechanics rushed to double-check every tank, every connection, every engine. Colonel Hayes found Jack near his plane, tools still scattered where Callahan had dropped them. "What happened here?" Hayes demanded. Jack hesitated, but only for a moment. Callahan tried to sabotage the tanks. Hayes closed his eyes briefly, anger flashing across his face. "I suspected he'd crack, but not like this." "What will you do with him?" Jack asked. Hayes' voice lowered. "That's not your concern anymore. He won't be flying with you." Jack felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He didn't hate Callahan. He just wished the man had trusted them, trusted himself, enough to see the mission through. But there was no time to dwell. The clock was ticking. By afternoon, the squadron's orders arrived. They were to pack, prepare, and report to the transport planes waiting to take them to Iwo Jima, the tiny island that would serve as the launching point for the most dangerous fighter escort mission in American history. Jack stood beside his Mustang one last time before it was loaded onto a cargo vessel. He touched the polished metal of the nose, feeling the cold surface under his palm. "This is it," he whispered. "We're really doing this." He wasn't speaking to the plane. He was speaking to the memory of his brother. To every bomber crew who died without protection. To every pilot who trusted him. When he stepped away from the Mustang, the sunset cast long shadows across the tarmac. Behind him, the engines of transport planes rumbled to life. Ahead of him lay a journey into the unknown. And none of them, Jack included, were ready for what awaited them in the skies near Japan. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed, liked the video, and shared it so more people can follow this mission. And tell us in the comments, if you discovered a squadron member sabotaging the mission, what would you have done? The journey to Iwo Jima felt like stepping off the edge of the world. The island had been captured only weeks earlier, and the scars of battle were everywhere. Scorched earth, twisted metal, abandoned bunkers, and the lingering smell of smoke carried by the wind. Nothing about it felt welcoming. It felt like a place suspended between life and death. As the transport aircraft descended, Jack looked out the small window and saw row after row of B-29 bombers lined up on makeshift runways. Even from the air, they looked enormous. Silver giants waiting for their escort. The men working around them moved with urgency. Everyone knew what was coming. When Jack stepped onto the ground, the heat hit him first. Then the noise, engines revving, hammers striking steel, shouting, metallic clanks and clinks. Iwo Jima wasn't a base. It was a battlefield turned launch pad. Colonel Hayes greeted the incoming pilots with a nod. "Welcome to the front line," he said. "This is where the mission becomes real." They were escorted to a tent where their Mustangs had been offloaded from ships over the last day. Jack felt a rush of relief when he saw his aircraft, gleaming, intact and ready. Mechanics were already attaching the long-range drop tanks under the wings, tightening every bolt and fitting each line with meticulous precision. "You'll be wheels up tomorrow," Hayes said. "And you need to be ready." The pilots nodded, though the weight of the words hit each one differently. That night, Jack joined a briefing with bomber crews. The tent buzzed with voices. Pilots, navigators, gunners, intelligence officers, and commanders. A giant map of Japan lay in the center of the table. A major pointed to the route. "We'll fly north across the sea, then turn toward Tokyo at dawn. The Japanese expect bombers, but they won't expect your Mustangs. That element of surprise is our biggest advantage." The bomber crews listened carefully. Many of them looked worn down. Eyes sunken, shoulders stiff, uniform stained. They'd been making long-range raids for months, losing friends and aircraft along the way. Seeing the Mustangs brought a flicker of hope back into their expressions. One of the bomber pilots turned to Jack. You boys really think you can make it all the way there and back? Jack nodded. We're going to try. The man exhaled slowly. Try is all we've ever done. Later, lying on his cot in a crowded tent, Jack couldn't sleep. The distant rumble of engines echoed through the night. The air was thick with the smell of oil and hot metal. Men snored around him, but none slept deeply. Everyone felt the same thing, a pressure building in their chests, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Near midnight, Jack stepped outside for air. He found Colonel Hayes standing alone, staring at the Mustangs under floodlights. You can feel it, can't you? Hayes said without looking at him. Jack nodded. Like the whole world is waiting. Hayes crossed his arms. This mission, it's more than just a military strike. If we succeed, we'll show the enemy they're not safe anywhere. It will shake their confidence. Maybe even shorten the war. And if we fail? Jack asked quietly. Hayes didn't answer right away. When he spoke, his voice was low. Then the war becomes even longer, harder, bloodier. And many of the men in those B-29s won't make it home. Jack felt his stomach twist. The responsibility settled heavier on his shoulders than ever before. But Hayes wasn't finished. I chose you for this squadron, he said. Not because you were perfect, but because you were determined. You fight with purpose. Men like that are rare. And tomorrow you'll need that more than ever. Jack didn't know what to say. He simply nodded. When the sun finally climbed over the island the next morning, the air was cool but buzzing with tension. Mechanics made final checks. Pilots strapped into their gear. Ground crews fueled and armed the Mustangs with .50 caliber rounds, loading belts of ammunition with practiced hands. Jack climbed into his cockpit and fastened the straps across his chest. The seat felt different today. Warmer, heavier, almost alive. The drop tanks glinted under the wings, filled to the brim. Through the canopy, he saw the B-29s starting their engines. Massive propellers turning, smoke rising. The sky vibrated with power. Hayes' voice came through the radio. Gentlemen, this is it. Engines start on my mark. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, whispering a silent message to his brother. Then he took a deep breath and opened them again. He was ready. But just as the engines roared to life and the squadron prepared for takeoff, a panicked voice crackled through the radio. Someone shouting from the far end of the runway. And what he reported would turn the entire mission upside down. The radio crackled again, louder this time, urgency threading every word. Colonel Hayes. We've got movement. Japanese reconnaissance plane spotted to the north. Low altitude. It's heading straight for the island. A cold silence swept across the runway. If the enemy scout plane radioed back what it saw, dozens of Mustangs armed with long-range tanks, B-29s fueled and ready, Japan would know exactly what was coming. The element of surprise, the heart of the entire mission, would be gone. Hayes' voice snapped like a whip. Mustang squadron. Immediate scramble. Get airborne now. Engines roared across the island as Jack slammed the throttle forward. His aircraft leapt to life, trembling with power. The ground crew sprinted clear. Dust whipped across the runway. Tower, this is Red 2 rolling. Red 3 rolling. Jack pulled onto the runway, heart pounding, pedals tight under his boots. Red 1 rolling, Hayes said from the lead Mustang. Intercept course. Do not, repeat, do not let that recon plane escape. The aircraft thundered down the strip. Jack felt the wheels lift. The sudden lightness of breaking free from the earth. One by one, the Mustangs climbed sharply into the morning sky. They had trained for Tokyo. But now the first fight of the mission had already begun. Clouds streaked past as they gained altitude. Jack scanned the horizon, and then he saw it. A lone Japanese Ki-46 reconnaissance plane glinting in the distance, banking hard toward the north. Hayes' voice cut through the radio. There it is. Red Squadron, Titan formation. Jack gripped the stick and pushed the Mustang faster. The drop tanks made the aircraft heavy, sluggish. The Japanese plane, sleek and built for speed, darted ahead like a needle threading through wind. "We can't catch him like this," Lieutenant Ross barked. "We're too slow with the tanks." Hayes responded instantly. "Negative. We drop those tanks only after we reach the strike point." Jack clenched his teeth. Hayes was right. Without the fuel, they'd never reach Tokyo. But if the recon plane got away, reaching Tokyo might not matter. The Japanese would scramble fighters. They could send interceptors to Iwo Jima itself. The whole mission could be wiped out on the ground. The Ki-46 accelerated, turning toward a bank of clouds. "Sir," Jack shouted into the radio. "Request permission to drop tanks." A long pause followed. Split seconds stretched thin. Then Hayes spoke, voice taut with conflict. "Permission denied." Jack's gut twisted. He understood the reasoning, but he also understood what was at stake. The Japanese plane banked sharply, disappearing into a veil of cloud. "We're losing him," Ross yelled. Jack felt something ignite inside him. Something fierce, something unwavering. He flipped his thumb over the emergency release switch on his control panel. "I can catch him," Jack said, voice steady. "But not like this. Turner, do not drop those tanks." Hayes ordered. Jack hesitated only one more heartbeat. Then he pulled the switch. With a metallic clatter, the long-range tanks detached, tumbling through the air before dropping into the sea below. The Mustang surged forward, lighter, faster, alive. Ross swore. Hayes shouted his name. But Jack didn't hear any of it. The engine roared like a living beast as he dove into the cloud bank. Inside the gray mist, visibility vanished. For a moment, he flew blind, trusting instinct and training. Then, he burst out the other side. The Japanese plane was right there. Jack steadied the Mustang, brought the sight reticle over the enemy's tail, and squeezed the trigger. The guns thundered. Tracers stitched through the air, striking the Ki-40 SAXS right engine. Flames erupted instantly. The Japanese pilot fought for control, but the aircraft spiraled downward, trailing smoke. A final burst from Jack sealed the kill. The recon plane plunged into the ocean. For a long moment, Jack could only breathe. Then Hayes' voice came through the radio. Quiet, controlled, and heavy. Turner returned to formation. When Jack rejoined the squadron, no one spoke. The bombers behind them rumbled forward, ready to take off. The entire mission hung in the balance. Hayes finally addressed him. "You disobeyed a direct order, and because of it, the mission still has a chance." Jack lowered his head. "Sir, Save it," Hayes said. "We're not done yet." The B-29s lifted into the air. The Mustangs followed, minus one set of tanks. Jack knew what it meant. He couldn't make it to Tokyo now. And he couldn't make it back. Hayes spoke again, voice softer. "When we reach altitude, Turner, you'll break off. Return to base. We will take it from here." Jack stared ahead, throat tight. He felt pride. He felt sorrow. But above all, he felt purpose. The Mustangs climbed with the bombers toward the rising sun. Tokyo awaited. And though Jack would not be there for the final strike, his decision, the moment he pulled the release switch, ensured the mission would go forward. History would remember the Mustangs that roared over Japan at 444 miles per hour. And it would remember the pilot who made sure they got there. Thanks for watching.